Hello everyone. I'll still leave a minute for people to join, but I'll start going now. So I'm sharing the screen here. Before I get into today's lecture, I'll just kind of go through some stuff to follow up from last class on Tuesday. Here's the homepage on Canvas. When you guys come over here, you'll see all these different links here. What you are signed up for is mine, which is right here. And when we do eventually go back to on campus, we're over at Voorhees, 105, Tuesday and Thursday. I guess I should put the time here, but if you're sitting here in the lecture now, you know what time it is, 7:30. And my office hours, I will be doing them right after class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Down here on the left-hand side, you see all the different things here. Actually, I should switch to student view. They'll have less options here. You see the announcements, which you should pay attention to. We do try to be careful not to post announcements to everyone in class unless it's coming from Professor Trees, who covers like the entire department. But sometimes things kind of slip through, but we try to reduce the noise. So unlike what you see here, where you see a lot of these here, for you, you should see a lot less of these announcements. So do try to pay attention to them. There's the assignments that are here. Here's like the files that will have all the different resources. If you want to look at your grades, there's the quizzes, here's the modules and whatnot. And I actually have the same thing on my page. So if you were to bookmark my page, you would see that. The other thing I would point out, which some people asked about, is this is us, right? So you see two things here. This is for the asynchronous sections, which you're not in. You're over here, okay? So this is the exams schedule here. We'll update this part as the exam gets closer. It depends on us securing the room and whatnot. Let's go to my page here. And so you can see here, I already posted last class, the PowerPoint, actually the PDF technically, and then also the lecture recording. Apologies, there were some people who were accessing Zoom from outside of the country and the security prevented that from working. So I changed the security settings, so you should be able to watch the lecture from outside of the country now. But in any case, I'm recording this anyway, so I'll post a recording up to here. Okay, and then you can see up here, I tried to put these different things that you can click on the left-hand side all in one place too, right? So whether it's the announcements, the student schedule, assignments, so on and so forth, right? Lab hours. Let's go here to student schedule very quickly. And I just zoom in here and you can see we're right here. Okay, so we're just basically doing introduction, right? So I walked through the Canvas stuff here. We're on chapters 1 and 2 on the book. And, you know, over here is the different bits about the post date, the due dates, the late dates, the quizzes, the points that you get, so on and so forth, right? So a lot of information here, but hopefully it's organized well that you understand what you need to do and what the points are and everything like that. Okay. And just like so. Now, if there's any questions, feel free to just you know, stick around a little bit after class, or you can send me email. I think here I left my email here, like so. So you can just email me, whatever, or you just stick around after class. That's fine too. So let's get going here. So we're on to chapter 2. This is the human-computer interface. And, you know, I think similar to the last chapter, right? So there's the way I look at it for this class, there's two aspects to this class. One is quote unquote like book knowledge. So you'll be looking at different facts or different concepts that are in the book. You essentially just have to read it, you understand it, and you're able to answer those questions on the test, right? Like I said, last class, there's a number of questions, frankly, they're really right from the book, right? They're just, you know, like it's like a factual question that we just pull out from the book, and they're not meant to be hard, right? You just have to have read the book and you're good to go, right? And then there's the other aspect, which is around quote unquote programming, right? Which is around the HTML, the JavaScript, and the Excel. And those, I would say the best way to kind of work those is really, just doing like little examples. And if you search the internet, there's the W3 schools, which I think a few of you asked me about. Let me get out of this thing here, leave the student view, I'll go over to here. So W3 schools. And over here, you have all kinds of stuff, right? But basically, this is your main resource for HTML and JavaScript, right? And the nice thing about this is you can actually put the code in here and you can actually see it kind of working alongside. They create like a separate window and whatnot. So you see this try it yourself type of buttons. Don't worry about the Python and SQL and whatnot, but it's things like this. You say try it yourself and then you'll see a screen. Just for example, I do this, right? So you see like this run here. Don't like go too crazy trying to write notes on this. Don't worry, we'll cover this later. I'm just showing you an example. Like this is a resource that you can look at. There's all kinds of like little tutorials here. There's examples and whatnot. So when it comes to like doing coding, I would say just build up this like library of like little code samples to kind of practice like this, right? And use that as a way of studying for the exam. And I think the other bit I mentioned last class also was we have assignments. Usually like the lead time on them is about 2 weeks, but we don't actually sit in recitation or whatever and just walk through step by step every single thing on the assignment, practically doing the assignment for you. But if you just open up when the assignments are posted, if you just open that up and kind of go in there and, look at it and say, hey, like, you guys are not covering this. Can you cover this, right? Or can you answer this question? I'm a little bit confused on it. Try to do that as soon as possible, rather than kind of waiting until like a couple hours before the assignment is due and then saying, oh, I don't understand how to do this. So that's my suggestion if you want to make sure you're doing well on the assignments and as well as preparing for the exam. And then I'll tie this in also to our attendance policy. So the way I do the attendance, I usually do like a quick little question for you to answer in class. It might be like, see this thing here, right? Write a little bit of code or something, right? So my intent is not really to give you a killer hard question to do in class. It's more just like a quick little thing that you can do it for practice and, really helps you to study for the exam. And it helps me just to make a note that you were in class. Okay, so that's generally how I work. And the TAs kind of do something similar. Maybe ask you something in class. Maybe they get, whatever, a poll on Zoom or whatever. There's a couple ways to do that, but that's kind of how they work. It's really meant to not really kind of crack a whip on you, say you got to show up for every class, but just make it worth your while to show up to class. You show up to class, it will help you for your assignments or it will help you for studying for the exam. Okay. There we go. And let me see here. Okay, so let's start. All right, so we're chapter 2. Right, and there's all of these different points here, right? Feedback, new instance, perfect reproduction. These are key concepts here. And I'll be talking about that as we go through this lecture here. Okay, and this is just a bigger picture of the same thing. Okay, but just make a note of it. These are the important concepts that you want to make sure you understand. I think a lot of you, when we talk about human-computer interfaces, probably a lot of you can imagine, just whatever you do online in terms of e-commerce, probably most of you have done something where you've purchased online. More often than not, you probably purchase something from like Amazon or something like that. And, part of the thing with these type of e-commerce, yeah, there's some aspect of saying, oh, I can get this thing cheaper, maybe. But there's actually a lot of it. It talks about essentially your experience to deal with it, right? If the website or let's say on your mobile phone, that experience is very bad, very painful, you're going to be discouraged from really enjoying to purchase whatever it is that they're selling, regardless of the fact that it might be a quote unquote a good price. So the whole idea of like interfaces and making it so that it's easy for you to interact with a computer is actually a pretty important concept. Whether it's for your own, personal utility of like, maybe doing some analysis or whatnot, or, running like what you typically might see in terms of e-commerce and whatnot. So we'll go into some of these points here. So what is user experience, right? You think about it, it's like when you interface with something that is either unpleasant to look at, you look at a screen, it doesn't really look very pleasant. It's like all kinds of crazy colors, they're clashing, the font sizes are all over the place, whatever. It almost physically hurts to look at something. It's obviously a very poor user experience, right? You don't want to look at something like that. You don't want to look at something that's like blinking in your face or whatnot. And then you also have usability, right? So one of the early things that Amazon came through with is the idea of like the one click, right? So in the early days, with a lot of the e-commerce stuff, I mean, you're clicking on multiple pages, clicking around, you have to type in your credit card information, like all kinds of stuff. It took like a lot of like clicking around on your keyboard to actually complete a transaction. And Amazon really streamlined it and really made it to the point where you didn't have to think too much, just one click and boom, you got something like landing on your doorstep like tomorrow, right? So that's part of like, this usability, this user experience, right? Can you do it without, having a whole bunch of like, questions about how does this thing work? Essentially, can you look at it, do it without directions, right? How intuitive is it, right? You think about it, like how many of you maybe buy a computer, buy a TV? I hope it's easy enough that you don't have to like read the directions, right? I know they give you directions and stuff, but ideally, whatever it is, it should be easy enough as a consumer product that you just open it up, you don't read any directions, you just plug it in or you just flick the switch, everything installs, everything is up and running and it's smooth, right? It's not like maybe putting together IKEA furniture or something like that. So that's important. In terms of like something that you want to mass market for consumers. So that's part of the UX, right? And then, this part over here, usability obviously overlaps with the feel. Like, do you feel like any angst in running whatever it is that you're running, a website or something like that? So all of this is part of user experience, okay? Now, when we talk about like the features in terms of like the interface, there's all kinds of different ways that you're engaging, let's say, either your desktop computer or your phone or whatever, right? And so these are some of the concepts within that. There's this idea of feedback. Oh, actually, one quick thing. I know a lot of you are kind of sending messages on the chat, but I'm actually not running chat. I'm not looking at the chat while I'm going through this PowerPoint, but right near the end, I will kind of try to end it a little bit early so I can run through all of the chat and see if there's anything I need to respond to. So bear with me. I don't actually run my chat at the same time I'm sharing the screen, okay? So I saw that last time. There was like a whole ton of stuff on the chat messages that I think I might have missed. So sorry about that. So on the feedback, that's kind of like, maybe you've seen sometimes where you're waiting for something to happen and you might see something like a little hourglass spinning around, or you see like a progress bar going across, or you're filling out like a form, right? And it's telling you, oh, there is like 3 pages to fill out. You filled out page 1 of 3, or you're on page 2 of 3. So this idea of like feedback to show your progress through whatever process you're doing is one way of improving your experience, right? I don't think anybody really likes to fire something away and not really know like, is anything happening? Is there any progress or whatever? Like, so people like to get that feedback to know that the computer's doing something for them, whatever it is that you ask the computer to do, that it just didn't like go into a black hole or something like that. A consistent interface. Probably one common area for this would be like if you're used to using, let's say, Microsoft applications, right? And I only bring that up because Microsoft obviously has a whole bunch of different applications that many of you are used to kind of get your work done, whether it's like Microsoft Office with individual components, which would be like, you know, Word, Excel, right? PowerPoint, Project, whatever, right? Like all of them, they are serving different functions, right? One's a spreadsheet, one's a word processor and whatnot. But if you look, there's like a lot of commonality, what we call consistent interface for doing different, for doing similar types of things, right? One would be, let's say, saving a copy of whatever it is, saving a copy of your Word document, saving a copy of your PowerPoint, whatever it is, there's a file. And it says you can save as, you want to save it locally, you want to save it on the cloud, like whatever, right? Like all that's consistent because there's no need to make it different. Why would you do it differently from one to another, right? So it's doing a common function and it does it all the same way. So we want to have that consistent interface, right? So, you know, whether you look at like a switch to determine whether like you flick it on or off, or you turn a knob to turn the volume up, let's say, or you have a slider to kind of, you know, push things higher or lower. Those are all examples of certain common things that you kind of see across many different applications, but they're consistently applied, right? So it helps ease people's usage of it. So they feel comfortable using it without having to read directions and stuff like that. Then there's the idea of perfect reproduction, right? Ultimately, everything from a data perspective stored in a computer is zeros and ones, okay? In our world, at least. So zeros and ones. And so the idea of perfect reproduction is pretty easy, right? You just replicate all these zeros and ones, right? As long as you have enough space for it, it's easy to exactly reproduce something, right? Alternatively, something that's very hard to have perfect reproduction is really more in the analog space. You know, so if you look at, you know, old audio types of recordings, whether it's on tape or it's on a disc or whatever, all of those, you keep on making copies of it. Over time, it will degrade because you're not able to make perfect reproductions of it. And, you know, we have placeholders. You know, I guess I'll just show you examples of those also. And, you know, that will give you some idea of how that works too. Okay, so feedback. I kind of mentioned it. I was just talking about it, like, you know, but you can think about it for yourself. What are some of the different ways that your computer gives you feedback? Okay. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I think it's a fairly common thing here. But look, here are some examples here. Okay. The common one here is like this little hourglass thing here, right? You might see something spinning around, right? You probably see like these little spinners with the different colors. When you see this pop up, it usually tells you that you can drag something around and reposition it. And then you can kind of see these common things. You look at it, you know, kind of what it's referring to. Okay. And of course, this progress bar is very common. Okay. Right. And like what I was just talking about, consistent interface, right? You can see things, file, edit, cut, copy, and paste at the edit menu. It usually falls in line with Microsoft products, but ultimately, like a lot of applications follow these conventions at this point. And so these are the reasons of why you want to have a consistent interface. Number one, like the code that supports each of these functions, you know, behind the scenes, you can't really see it, but behind the scenes, actually, it's really the same code. They're basically, it's a reusable component. So they'll use that same thing across all the other applications because you're doing the same thing. There's no point in writing different code for doing exactly the same thing. So it makes it easier for you to, deploy new applications, for you to make enhancements, for you to support it. Okay. So it's ease of use, cost for the companies that are supporting these applications. Okay. And it also helps you, right? So you can very quickly open up application and be able to use it fairly quickly, at least the basic functionality. So it helps you in terms of being able to use an application. Okay. And certain types of functions, they're just basic functions like open something up, save something, all of those type of things. It's like ABC, right? It's just like very common type of things that it would just exist there almost automatically. So a lot of times you deploy new applications, you almost kind of provide it like a template, right? It says, oh, I want to create a new application XYZ for, let's say, Microsoft, right? And basically they'll provide you essentially almost like a frame or something. And within that, you will be able to like get out of the box, like all these different application functions right out of the box, right? Like I said, the file, the edit, the copy, the paste, the new instance, templates, and stuff like that. Okay. And this last point, it is, again, part of the user experience, right? Consistency provides a strong sense of familiarity. So once you've seen one application from a company, hopefully any new applications from that company, it's relatively quick for you to pick up and use it, okay? Okay, so this is just one of the standard types of functions, like I was saying before, new instance. Right. So if you want to come up with a new Word document, in this case, they're talking about a new contact on your contacts, or a new calendar appointment. You just hit new instance and boom, you got a new one. You got a blank document or something like that. So that's fairly straightforward. Now, in terms of the user interface, this is like something from a long time ago, right? What they call a command line interface, right? This is coming back from like the mainframe. So we used to have these like big mainframe computers, and the only way you can interface your user interface was essentially these text-based screens, and you would punch in a number or something like that, right? Or these function keys, right? You see down here, PF3, F4, PF9. So these are like keys that you can see at the top of your keyboard right now, right? You hit one of those keys and it does something, right? Or up at the top, you can see those numbers, like 1 for user tasks, 2 for office tasks, or something like that. You would just punch in those numbers, and then it would just maybe pop up another menu, and it'll be like a whole like tree of different menus and stuff like that. So it's very foreign to someone who is kind of used to doing things either by touch or by using a mouse, okay? But this is the way things used to be. So this is what they call a command line interface, a text-based GUI, I guess you would call it, okay? Okay, so, we talked about the idea of like a graphical user interface. So this is basically something that really was developed and originated in the 1970s. And their idea was to think about like your computer, your screen that you're looking at, as a desktop, right? So, and this is kind of almost coming from the point like at the early days, it wasn't really, I mean, there were some games, but it wasn't really a huge amount of games. It's more along this idea of like a computer being like a productivity tool for you, right? And so if you're sitting there, at a typical desk back then, right, you would have like something like a notepad that you can write stuff on. Maybe you have like a trash can that you would throw stuff away. You might have a little calendar that you can look at, like all of those typical things that you might have on your desk. They basically try to replicate that into like a desktop interface for the computer. And the computer would basically try to replace all those functions on this desktop, on this graphical user interface. Okay. And so make sure you understand the fact that there's a distinction between like inventing something, originating the idea, and taking it to mass market, right? And, making it commercially viable as a personal computer, right? And, I kind of mentioned this in the last lecture. We've had a number of people kind of mix this up on the exams. So make sure you understand that concept, right? So like I said, up here, you have the invention, right? And then you have essentially building on this to become a viable, commercially successful product as a personal computer, right? Xerox, unfortunately, never really did that, right? So it was really the folks over at Apple that were able to do that. So that's the distinction there. So read the question carefully on the exam, what it's asking for. Okay.
Professor,
Yes.
I have a question on the previous slide.
Okay.
The desktop one. What's the difference between graphical user interface instead of text?
So text would be like this, right? So when I look at, let's say, a text-based system, the only thing I can really interact with is essentially typing in whatever's in my keyboard, right? So I can punch in a number, I can put in this PF keys or whatever, right? Now, when I go over to like a graphical user interface, there's basically all these pixels that are on your screen, different colors, and it's, in this case, we're representing a desktop. And so you have a wider range of like interaction that people find more interesting and more analogous to, let's say, in this case, a desktop, like a real world, right? So that's kind of like the main difference from a functional standpoint. But, I guess from a technology perspective, it's fairly lightweight for you just to capture characters, right? Like keyboard characters here, right? Versus like if I'm doing something on a desktop, then you basically have to worry about like, different actions, right? I'm clicking on my mouse, or I'm looking at this location on the screen. So you can imagine it takes more computing power. It takes more programming, let's say language, to be able to interact via a desktop, a GUI, versus a text-based interface. Okay. I hope I didn't go into too much detail there, but
No, it was fine. Thank you.
yeah, that's the idea. Okay. So this goes back to what I was just talking about before, right? If you look at it, look, here's your little calendar here. Here's like a little diary. Here's like a little clock, calculator. There's the notepad I was talking about. Here's like sort of like a quick drawing program here. So yeah, I don't know if like a desktop really ever had this many different things on it, but yeah, that was the idea of coming up with this idea of a desktop metaphor as a way to interface with the computer. It made the computer something that people can kind of relate to, right? Because it has like this analogy to like what people were used to in the real world back then, right? This is kind of what like a typical office worker may have seen on their desktop back in those days, okay? And so, what are the typical types of things on that desktop to interface with things? One idea is this slider here, right? So back then they would have like maybe radios or whatever, and there's different ways. You can either turn a knob to turn the volume up, or you would have a slider to kind of control like the bass, the treble, and the mid-range and stuff like that. So these ideas of sliders, dials, buttons, and stuff like that, again, these are analogies to like real world constructs. And hopefully by providing those real world analogy to real world constructs, it allowed people to pick up and use the computer fairly easily, okay? And so you can, it's one of those things, you can look at something, right? And you can almost like tell right away, what does it mean, right? So again, it's not like I have to open up like an instruction manual to figure out how this thing works, right? So you might look at like this thing, you might say, oh, it looks like, people are kind of talking to each other, right? With these little, what do you call those things? Those cloud with the dialogue that you put in here, right? Maybe you look at this, yes?
Speech bubbles.
Oh, yes, that's right. And you might look at this, you might say, oh, this looks like something that you pop up a picture. You want to view a picture, right? Maybe you look at this looks like some sort of mail, right? So maybe you're doing email with this, right? Just a couple of these type of things. You probably see it on your phone and whatnot, okay? So again, this kind of relates to the whole point. And the reason why I mentioned this a couple of times, like I said, these things do pop up on the exam. So I hate to sound like a broken drum, but that's kind of what it is. So you have like the introduction to the mouse, essentially. I kind of guess Apple was kind of famous for that, right? But they didn't invent it, okay? So this is all the way back in '68. They just didn't really commercialize it, right? So Apple basically took that over, that invention, essentially, and changed it, okay? And made it so, well, and to be fair, they changed it, but the hardware doesn't really mean anything unless you combine it with the software. So they combine the idea of the GUI, right, and the mouse to interface with that GUI together to make a very popular product, metaphor, paradigm, whatever you want to call it. It obviously put Apple on the map at that time, okay? And then now you go to like more of the current state, right? And this is evolving, but you guys probably know like practically everything happens on the phone right now, right? So, a lot of stuff that, you used to do in terms of like e-commerce or whatever has rapidly shifted to the phone, right? I forgot what the numbers are, but it's probably somewhere in the order of like, 3/4 or more, maybe 80% or so of whatever types of functions, e-commerce and whatnot is happening on phones right now versus like the traditional desktop, okay? And so that leads to the idea of doing things via touch, right? So you guys kind of know this if, whether you're doing stuff on the iPad, you're doing stuff on your phone, double tap, two fingers, like move things apart, move things together, like by the touch. That stuff is kind of evolved. It's supposed to be meant to be somewhat intuitive. And, that's generally how we interface with our current current ecosystem right now. Okay, so that's what they call the touch metaphor, right? And so how did that evolve? Right. Well, part of it, right? Obviously, your phone is very small, right? So you can imagine like having a phone and having like a mouse, right? Like that's not going to happen, right? So a lot of the evolution of the touch came about because of things like mobile phones or the iPad and whatnot. So the smaller screen footprint, and you're going to really, it's intuitive to really use a phone in that, and not use a phone, use a touch in that case, as opposed to the traditional method, which was the desktop computer with the mouse and stuff like that. Okay. Now, reproduction, right? And I think this one's kind of a simple concept, hopefully. And don't worry about the fact of like, there's various types of strategies that does change the quality of, let's say, in this case, we're talking about a picture because of compression, right? That is a topic that we're actually going to cover later in a couple of chapters or so. So don't worry too much about that. So, but in principle, assuming that you have unlimited storage and bandwidth and whatever, you would always kind of just take whatever the original is and just replicate all the zeros and ones, right? And that would be perfect reproduction, right? So There's no way there would be any difference if you copied exactly all of the zeros and ones for a particular image. Okay, so this is an example. I mean, I don't really know if you really can tell with the naked eye is anything different, right? There should be no difference between these. These are the same images, right? But the idea is that's the concept of like digital, right? When we get into compression later on, you can see, and the reason why compression is important, right? Because even at this current stage of technology, storage is not unlimited, although we seem to have vast amounts of storage now. Storage is not unlimited, and bandwidth is not unlimited, although it might seem like we're getting more and more bandwidth all the time. But in either case, compression is still an important concept, and we'll get into that more in later lectures. Okay, but the idea right now I'm saying is that an important concept for digital content is that you can perfectly reproduce it, you know, in zeros and ones basically. Copy and paste. I'm sure you guys have done that, right? Control C, Control V. If I'm up here, oops. Oh, actually not there. Where's my edit here? Here's a cut, here's a copy, and then there's a paste, right? So for example, I can do this. I can copy it. Like that, right? Fairly easy, although I took a little bit longer than I would like. That's the idea. My mouse is kind of flaking out on me here a little bit, but that's the idea. Copy and paste. That's a very common thing you see all over the place, whether you're doing it with images or you're doing it with text like I just did right now. Okay. So these are the points, right? You can obviously do editing a lot faster, right? So a lot of times you might make a whole bunch of copies of different things and then just tweak them a little bit here and there. And so that you can crank out something really quickly. And then reduces errors, right? Because you're not typing stuff over manually, let's say. And, you know, again, as part of the comment interface, this type of functionality is usually available in many different applications. Okay, it's just a common function that you would do, just like saving a file or something. Another common function is find and replace, right? I'm sure you kind of do that, right? So if I'm here, I mean, let's just pretend this is like a long thing, then I would do a Control F and I would do a find and I would find whatever, right? So this would be, and you know, analogous on Google, you would do a search or something, right? But you would do like this find. Again, this is something that is meant to help you if you're doing this at scale. Maybe you have like, you know, a huge document and you're trying to find like a particular text. You can just do that find, and maybe you need to do a replace all over the place too. So you see that all over. So this is like a quick little check, like self-study type of thing, whatever, right? I think you probably have the same thing in the book too. It might ask these self-study questions in the book also. So you can take a look at it, think about it. I'm not going to spend too much time about it. I'll just kind of make quick comment, right? So what is UI and UX, right? Okay, fine. We know what it stands for, right? User interface and user experience, right? But what is it really, right? So I would say UX is really, you're thinking about experience, right? Like your whole end-to-end experience, right? Your interface, like I showed you before, there's the text interface, there's like the desktop or the GUI interface, and now you have like the whole touch metaphor thing, right? How do you get data into the computer to do something, right? Whether I tell the computer my credit card number or what I'm like selecting to buy or whatever, that's the actual interface, that's the mechanics, right? That's when we say interface. I'm telling the computer like this value, right? But the experience is like, you know, how was the experience? Was it easy? Was it painful? Was it like, you know, my eyes were going like cross-eyed looking at this thing? It's like, how did you feel? You going through this process. That's the difference between the user interface versus the user experience. Okay. And, frankly, like user interface is sort of like very commodity, like there's all kinds of like stuff that's very standard now to get information into the computer, right? But the difference maker for many places in terms of like how successful they can be from an e-commerce standpoint or just from a usability standpoint is the user experience. So that's like something that's very significant in terms of people investing a lot of time, money, and effort to have a good user experience. Okay. I mean, probably the only people who don't care about your user experience is like, the government, like, state and towns, right? If you ever do those type of interfaces, like you want to pay your property taxes or whatever, their interfaces are awful, right? But anyone who wants to actually make any money, their interfaces are usually pretty good, right? So this UX side, I would say, is really important, right? I would say the UI side is fairly standard, right? These are standard stuff that's developed over time, and everybody can use them. There's nothing that stands out from that. The difference maker is the user experience, the UX side of things. Yeah, perfect reproduction. I think I just kind of went over that. Is it a property of analog or digital information, right? You can imagine we're going to probably take this and put that right into the exam. That's just going to be a standard exam question. So you should know this one. What's the purpose of the computers displaying progress bars when the items are loading, right? It's the feedback thing, right? You want to kind of see that thing. You want to just see like a screen looking at you and you don't know what the heck the computer is doing, right? So just a little quick check here. Like I said, you're going to probably see this in the book also. So take a look at these. If there's any of these checks in here that you don't know, pop me an email, let me know, and I'll make sure you hear from me before you hit the exam, okay? Yeah, another couple of quick checks here, so I won't go too much into that. And then this is a quick summary of what I showed you at the beginning in terms of the different topics here, okay? And really quickly, so this is the end of the slides here. So really quickly, let me come back to here. Actually, let me go to modules. I'm going to go to modules. Okay. So of course you have like these different general important documents here. But remember, like what I was saying, like each week we have these little resources, PDFs here. Okay. And so here we are, week 1. So let's see what week 1 looks like. Okay, so this kind of tells you like, well, here's the textbook. You can, I think we really encourage you to get the online or digital version, right? I have the book version, but there's no difference and it's a lot cheaper, right? So just get this online version. But here's all the key points here, and it goes through all these things here. I'm sure you've kind of seen this. Don't worry about this, right? It says text questions to complete. I mean, I would look at them, but don't feel like this is something that you do to turn in or something like that. Don't worry about that. But I would say just look at these, take a look at these and just answer them to yourself. Like just imagine that these questions will be on the exam, right? And see, how would you answer them? If there's anything there that you don't understand, then again, let us know, okay? You got the recitation information here. This is what they go through on the recitation, hopefully. If they don't, make sure you let them know, raise your hand, tell them that you didn't cover what was supposed to be covered on that recitation, okay? So pay attention to this. I mean, the reason why I'm showing you this, because a lot of times people have gone through the whole semester and don't realize that there's these modules that they should be looking at to tell them what they should focus on for their readings or for follow-up questions with the recitations. Okay. All right. So let me stop the share here. Let me see if anything I need to cover here. So we have resource added to the slides or announcements which resource is this? The W3 schools? The W3 schools is, okay, reference to practice coding site. Yeah. So that's the W3 schools. That's just a link. I can write the link onto my my resources here. So if I'm here, right, it's easy enough for me to just, so I can paste this, and I was over here, right? So yeah, if you want to get to it, you can just go to it here. I just made a note here. And just that's just a quick little hint about like, oops, I did that without sharing the screen. So yeah, so I just typed it in here, right? So W3 schools is the thing that you were looking for. So I'll stop the share again. All right, so that's the W3 schools. What else do we got? What's the difference between UI and GUI? I think I covered that. Are the exams online or in person? So for us, like we're doing the exams in person, okay? And practicing coding. Where is the PowerPoint? So the PowerPoint is on that screen I just showed you, like my screen there. And yes, the textbook only has answers to even questions. So if there's some odd or whichever questions don't have answers in the textbooks and you don't understand what it is, just let me know or let your TA know, and we'll respond to them. Okay. And like I said, these are not formal, that you don't answer these questions and then submit it to us, right? It's just for your own self-study, right? Hopefully the questions, whatever they're asking, you can just refer to them right in the book. But if there's anything there that you don't see as an answer or it's not obvious to you, just let me know and I'll cover that. Okay. And the other thing I would just add before I open up, if there's any more questions, feel free to pop it into the chat while I'm like kind of talking now. But the one thing I didn't mention from the last class, there's like this, it's pretty strong push in terms of getting student feedback. So we actually have you fill out survey at the middle of the course as well as the end of the course. And usually they encourage you to fill out those surveys. We give you extra credit. All that kind of stuff. But for me, and we take it seriously, like the department heads look at these feedback surveys on how to improve the class, whether the teacher or the TA is doing a good job. So whether they can come back and teach next semester, maybe, I don't know. But me personally, I feel like if I collect the feedback at that point in time, it's a little bit too late. So if you guys want to send me email anytime, just let me know if there's things in the class that I can help to make it better in any of the lectures or during your recitations or whatever, anything that we can do to improve things. Make sure you let me know, because then we can fix it now. Because if you tell me at the end of class when the surveys are turned in, it's a little bit too late for you. It doesn't help you at all. It will help maybe the next class. So we do want to encourage you to provide feedback on a timely basis, and it will help you because we'll make the class better for you. And that's what we want to do as soon as possible. Okay. So I want to encourage that. So let me come back to the chat, see if I missed anything here. Do we have to read every chapter to do well on the exams? Or is reviewing our notes enough? Yeah, so I was kind of mentioning in the last class, we don't really mean for like the book and the lecture and the TAs for the recitations to cover exactly the same thing. Otherwise, if we did that, then either one, you don't have to read the book, or you don't have to go to the lecture, or you don't have to go to the recitations, right? So all of the different pieces of the class are meant to complement each other. right? So I might not cover everything from the book word for word, right? Hopefully I'm extending some of the ideas that are covered in the book, but I'm not going to cover everything in the book, and the TAs won't either. So to answer that question, you do need to read the book, right? I've read the book myself, actually, and I don't know if it's really that hard to read it. So I don't consider it to be like reading like War and Peace or something like that. So, kind of read it. Don't stress out too much about it. If there's things in there you just don't get it after you read it, do bring it to the lecture. I can answer it, or I can answer it after class and office hours, as well as the TAs. Okay, so yes, you have to read the book basically, but don't stress out about it. If there's questions in the book you can't answer, that's fine too. Just let us know, and we'll help you to answer those questions. Okay. Besides looking at the weekly, what should we do? So what should we expect in terms of homework submissions or projects? So those are the assignments, right? So when those assignments become posted, we try to write the assignments so that they're fairly detailed in terms of the steps, like what you can do, what you shouldn't do, and stuff like that. But we always miss something, or there's always like something that we haven't thought of. So, I do really encourage people to open up the assignment as soon as it's posted, read through it, and try to like have some idea of what you think you need to do to complete the assignment. And if there's any issue at all, bring it to the lab hours, bring it to the recitation or whatever, and try to go through it. So I think that's really important for the assignments if you want to do well with them. You're not going to do well with the assignments if you try to do it at the last minute, and you're not going to be able to reach a TA or myself to answer questions. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So I don't want to keep you guys too much longer here. So, if I didn't really answer your questions on the chat, just stick around a little bit and I'll answer them. But everyone else, that's the end of the lecture, and I'll see you guys next week. Okay.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
weekend.
All right.
Thank
Have a
you.
good weekend.
Have a good night.
Thank
The rest of your weekend and the rest of your night. Thank you so
Have a
much.
good night.
Thank you. And yeah, whoever wants to stick around, I'm around to answer more questions.
Thank you, Professor.
Hi. Thank you. Yes, I will be posting these lecture recordings. So it's gonna be right in the table on my page. So I'll post that up. Okay. Cool. Yeah, any other questions I can answer? Cool. Let's see. I see Avi. Do you have any questions? Or let's see, Relay or Maloney? Okay, so if there's no questions, I'm gonna close this up.